There we go. So we're all formal. So thank you all for joining. Jim, you have the floor. So the audience is yours.
Well, thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, and Lee. Um, it's a pleasure being on here with you tonight. Hopefully, the thunder and lightning in the background won't interfere with us. Um, as you know, my name is Jim O'Connell, and I'm running for Executive Council in District 4. Um, I think I'll start by introducing myself and who I am and what I do and where I've been, so to speak. I've been I live in the city of Manchester. I've got four wonderful children and a beautiful wife, and I'm very fortunate to have all of those things since I came to the United States back in 1992. But early on in my life, I first got involved in politics as a young man when in living in Ireland, as you would have heard from my accent, perhaps. But even though I've been out there close to 40 years, as a young man in Ireland, Ireland was a pretty regressive place. And I can say this as a Catholic myself. The Catholic Church pretty much ruled the roost there, and it was very conservative politically. So the very first campaign that I was ever involved in my life was as an 17, 18-year-old, was the campaign to remove the status of illegitimacy, which in Ireland, if you were born out of wedlock, you had the word illegitimate written on your birth certificate, which is extraordinary in today's world, but that's how it was. But I was reminded, I spoke at the Rockingham Democratic meeting a couple of weeks back, and it happened to be the 50th anniversary of the date on which women in the United States could have a bank account or a credit card in their own name. So we quickly forget how far we've come. And the message, of course, is we're not going backwards. I picked up the bug early in life because we won that campaign and went on over the following couple of years to do, I won't regale you with a retelling of Irish history, but as a young man, I was very involved in, as we moved to, for instance, introduce divorce in Ireland. There was no divorce, amazingly. I was very proud as a 21-year-old man to be my constituency leader in leading the divorce action group, which against severe headwinds, I have to tell you, the forces of conservatism were in the ascendancy back in those days, and it was a tough battle and not always nice. And I went on to work on that and many other issues, and eventually I left Ireland, ended up in England, where I worked for a few years, including time driving buses in London, those iconic red buses. And I'm very proud that in my early 20s, I was a shop steward with the Transport and General Workers Union, now Unity. So I cut my chops there very early on. And I was very involved in the anti-apartheid movement, spending lots of Saturdays up in London outside the South African embassy, fighting that fight. And so I got the bug early, is what I'm saying. Eventually, I ended up working in Australia, where one day this wonderful young lady walked in the door. Her name was Kathy Sullivan. She was from Bedford, New Hampshire. It was 1992, and she and I met late in 92. We moved she was a tourist, taking a year off to travel around. I was working there. In 92, I came to the United States, bought our house in Manchester in 97. And here I am with four beautiful children and a wife. 32 years later, my youngest son graduated college, of whom I'm very proud, graduated college last weekend. So for most of the years, I worked in technology and cybersecurity, mostly in the secure identity space, and with a number of .coms back in the day. And then later, I was CEO of a couple of technology companies. And while my kids were in school in Manchester, I was involved in all the things most parents are. Doing things like I was on the board of Manchester Soccer League and the Little League, and were involved with their acting and their dance classes and all the things. And while I kept an interest in politics and worked on presidential campaigns in the state and stuff like that, and senatorial campaigns, I was busy raising a family. As soon as my kids got a little older, I decided that I had I had started an organization with a bunch of friends called Citizens for Manchester Schools, fighting for our schools in the city of Manchester, which were under severe attack, and in the state too, of course. And that went on for close to 10 years. And at the end of that, I got tired of being on the outside trying to convince and cajole and organizing. And I'd spent many years with PTO organizations and etc. So I ran for office. And very fortunately, and germane to this conversation, I've run 3 times for office in the city of Manchester, and I've topped the poll for Democrats each time. I run citywide in all 12 wards, and I get I'm very fortunate, and I don't take it lightly, and I don't want to sound conceited about it, but I've worked very hard. I'm very well known. I work all across the city. I attend meetings everywhere. I always answer my phone. I answer all my emails, and I stand up at meetings regularly in the city of Manchester, and I repeat the fact that, anybody in the city, I've always returned their phone calls and emails, and I don't know why that is difficulty for others, but it's not a difficulty for me. And so it means that I've gotten an increasing share of the vote each time. And so when it came to the executive council, my first thing was who had the most practical possibility of taking this seat. I've had an adversarial relationship with Teddy Gatzis, which I'm kind of proud of actually, for more than a decade. And I expected when I was running that I'd be running against Ted Gatzis, and he left the field. We'll never know whether he left after finding out I was running or not. We won't be able to prove a negative, but deep inside, I like to think that perhaps I had something to do with that. And if I did, well, there's a win right there. We're glad to see the back of Ted. He was not great for the things that we care about: voting against reproductive rights, the defunding of Planned Parenthood, not allowing progress on commuter rail, and so many other things. Sex education funding for students, reducing teenage pregnancy rates, all those kinds, anything that was coming through that body for the last number of years, he voted against. And so I was getting increasingly angry as these things were going on. And I decided to run because of the fact that when I looked around, I thought, in order to win, this is a serious race. The last time my friend Kevin Kavanagh lost by 5,000 and some votes against Eddie Gatzis, Kevin underperformed in the city of Manchester in the end because he hadn't run throughout the whole city as I have. So my path, and what I'm saying to you and the people of the district and my Democratic friends, is if you take this race seriously, and it's not a game, and we're not looking for Pyrrhic victories and incremental, we'll get there over a number of things. I want to win this seat now. We can do it. I've got the votes to do it with the help of the people in places like Lee, which is an important, as you know, Democratic stronghold within the district. But going out and fighting hard in Bedford and Hooksett and Goffstown and all the towns, or Londonderry, etc. I'm in this thing to win it. I'm fighting hard on all fronts. I have a wonderful team on board. The people who are helping me with my campaign are the team who helped Chris Pappas to win this seat 3 times in a row. And so the people who are helping me with my campaign are exactly the same people. And so they've been down this path before. They think we've got a path to victory. Something about myself, maybe, in the work I've done. I'm not aspirational about what I could do or would do. I've got a record to stand on, and I think that's an important differentiator here. As vice chair of the Manchester Board of School Committee, as you may know, the chair is the ex officio chair of the board, but the vice chair, most of the functions of chair fall to the vice chair. And so we've done a number of things in that over the last number of years. Those of you paying attention in Concord over the last few weeks, we've seen some horrible bills passed last week to go before the governor, which are, attacks on our LGBTQ plus community, on our transgender community, just horrible stuff. People who will not stop trying to interfere with the lives of others. And in the city, I bring that up because if you were listening to those debates in the House in Concord, you would have heard again and again the Republicans say, we need to do this because Manchester. We have to bring this legislation in because Manchester. It was always because Manchester hasn't allowed them to do the things they want to do. We will not allow them to force girls to be forced to go into boys' bathrooms just because they happen to have been biologically male at the moment of birth. These decisions are best belong between a family and its advisors and doctors. And even though I look at myself now and I find myself, I was going to talk about old white men in Concord, and I wish I had some hair dye as I say that. But it isn't a place for politicians to be interfering. And likewise, when it comes to reproductive rights, etc., there is no place for government shouldn't be involved in these often very difficult decisions that need to be made by families. So in Concord or in Manchester, I have led the fight. There was a vote a few years ago, and it was to allow the 2,000 teachers and staff of the Manchester School District that their insurance be allowed to cover LGBTQ areas. And the vote was 5-2, or 3-2 on a 5-person committee to allow that to happen. If that in that fight, that fight had to be won. Had it not been won, then 2,000 people in the city of Manchester wouldn't have had that right. So every day when we go to City Hall and go to meetings, we have people from out of state, we have national organizations. Manchester is the largest city, is the place where they come to protest, and they say terrible things, and it's easy to legislate in the back room when you're not being shouted at in the chamber. It's a little more difficult to do it in the face of that kind of adversity. I'm used to it. I carry it as a badge of honor. I make no excuses for the fact that I've been a warrior in these areas and will continue to be. In the city of Manchester, I came to office talking about action, immediacy, and the need for urgency in what we did. Most people would have said, looking at Manchester 5 years ago, that there's no way, given the tax cap, that you could get the city of Manchester to vote to spend money on building new schools. And it notoriously had not done so, hadn't built a school for 30 years. That was the single issue. There were many, but that was the one that I led with. And again, it takes a full committee to vote, and I don't want to disregard the fact that the Board of School Committee voted for these things and wouldn't happen without the full board. I think that's important to note. But it's also truthful to say that as the leader of that board, and as the person who was the chair of the Finance Committee and drove these things through with great determination, energy, and with not willing to go off into subcommittee and take other decisions and delay decisions for years. And we delivered $306 million in new construction and renovation in the city of Manchester as phase one of a multi-stage project. And that project is starting as we speak. The first engineering work is going on, and there will be four middle schools will have big extensions on them, 40,000 square foot extensions, and be completely remodeled inside, and a brand new elementary school right in the heart of downtown where the most needy students are, a $72 million elementary school. I did that against the headwinds, without the cooperation of Mr. Edelblut or Mr. Sununu, or without support, not a single penny coming from the state of New Hampshire to support that work. And we're still doing it under the tax cap, even though I'm not a big advocate of the tax cap itself. When it comes to teachers, we delivered a 19% pay increase to teachers in Manchester last year, 9% last year. It's over a 3-year period, 9% last year, 5% this year, and 5% next year. That's an unheard of increase in teacher salaries in the city of Manchester. Again, done against some headwinds. Across the city, I've been fighting for years for $15 an hour minimum wage, and long before I was ever in office. And we delivered a $15 an hour minimum wage to workers in Manchester. And if you can believe it, just 3 years ago, janitors in the city of Manchester, there are 107 of them, they were earning as low as $9.10 per hour. That's an immoral action. That's how I described it in City Hall. It goes beyond politics. It goes beyond anybody. We talk about the $7.25 lousy minimum wage in the state of New Hampshire. To have people cleaning bathrooms and toilets in high schools at 10 o'clock at nighttime for $9.10 an hour. Those people, we ask who they are. Well, they're often the least amongst us. First of all, the majority of them are women. Secondly, many of them are refugees. Many of them don't speak English as a first language. Those people are often working 2 and 3 jobs in order just to pay the kind of rents it costs because of the cost of housing in the state and across the country today. So their kids are at home at 8 and 9 o'clock at night time with homework to do as well, with no mom and dad to help them, to guide them, to encourage them not to be on their phone or not to watch TV or to finish their homework. And then we wonder about the disparate results that we get at the end. So I'm very proud of the fact that that ended up being greater than a 50% pay increase for the work for hundreds of workers, because it wasn't just that set of 107 workers. It also applied to our kitchen staff. It applied to our paraprofessionals who were earning $13.40 an hour. I want to give you an example of the kind of to get that done. Those things don't get done unless you actually set out to do them and you fight to get them done. And you have to fight your friends and your enemies sometimes. My fellow members, of whom I respect, there was during that process, I ended up, even as the leader of that committee, I ended up at the end of a 13-1 vote. I'm being the one because I wanted my Democratic colleagues to include a COLA in that $15 an hour pay. It's $15 an hour, folks. And the COLA would have meant that over the next 3 years of that contract, that 15 would have gone to 15.25 and then 15.75 and maybe 16.10. By not doing it, and the point I made to my friends, who they are friends of mine, Democrats on that board, is that we don't know who's going to be in this board in 2 years' time. This is about urgency and taking action now. We don't know who might get elected. We just saw a change of mayors and aldermen in the city of Manchester. So in 3-4 years' time, when that $15 is really only worth 12 and 11, it may be years before we get to do it again. In the end, my colleagues voted not to do that. They wanted to just do the 15 because they said, well, let's take a step first. They also wanted to do $13 first and then 14 and then 15. I'm telling you all of this out in Lee, and I don't want to be Manchester centric. I just want to say that there are doers and there are talkers. There are people who have urgency and get things done, and there are people who talk about they'd like to get things done. I have a strong record and I'm known for being a pragmatist, being somebody who delivers, being someone who's a person of their word. I answer every phone call and every email. I'm accessible to the people of Manchester, and that's why I run and I get the votes out of Manchester. One last thing I would say to you, and I want to take all of that and bring it to the district. I want to go up to Concord and I want to fight for labor rights. I want to fight for reproductive rights. I want to fight for the environment. I want to fight for the state 10-year transportation plan, an area that I have quite a lot of expertise in, being involved in public-private partnerships in multi-billion-dollar projects around the United States, and I'd be happy to talk about those. I'm known as Mr. Education because I've been leading just on the Union Leader today, or yesterday, you'll see that, or in the Concord Monitor, it was today, actually, I think. I was quoted in my conversations with Mr. Edelblut when we demanded he come before our board last Monday night. So I've got stuff done. I have the history to do it. I have the backing of the people to do it with your support. I'll bring the energy that it takes, the foresight that it takes, the determination that it takes. I don't believe in playing defense, which we often do outside our own goals. I was on the state board of a state soccer board. And, in soccer, if you're playing right in front of your own goal, bad things happen. So, you want to be playing on the other side of the field. And too often in policy issues in the state of New Hampshire, we're playing the Republicans' playbook. We're playing according to what they want us to play. I believe in a little offense, and in the end, I'll be happy to start on a halfway line. But I'm going up to Concord to get things done. I'm not really interested in, obviously, I'm interested in what happens in 10 years from now, but I'm interested in victories now. And of course, the last thing, let me say this. All of us as Democrats committed to the process that we are committed, and demonstrated by the fact that you're here listening to me, on a bad night, 6 months before an election. The way to achieve our ends is going to go through the Executive Council, whether we like it or not. I'm sure all of you, and I certainly will fight my damnedest to make sure that we have a Democratic governor in office come the beginning of next year. But should we fail, we'll have Kelly Ayotte there in governor. And what brakes can we put on her? Well, if we have 3 of the 5 executive council seats, we can ensure that Frank Edelblut is sent marching down the road when he comes up for renewal in March. And we can ensure that whatever judges that might be appointed or commissioners that might be appointed will be more reasonable and rational people. And the biggest part, folks, is we actually have an opportunity to do it. It's not dreaming. It's not, well, if the sun always shines and if we get it all perfect, we'll creep through, we'll get through. With me as the candidate coming out of District 4, I'm going to have higher votes than any Republican will have, or any other Democrat will have coming out of the city of Manchester. And while that doesn't get you there, because you have to have Lee, and you have to have Loudon, and you have to have Hooksett, and you have to have votes in Bedford and Londonderry and other places. But if you can't maximize the vote in Manchester, you can't get there. So that's what I came to talk to you about tonight. I'd love to talk to you many more times in the future. I'd be happy to do that. My number is 617-851-0428. My website is O'Connell, OCONNELL, for FOR, NH.com. So O'Connell for NH.com. And if you can't remember all of that, Google me and Google the school board in the city of Manchester, and my phone number and email and all that's published down there. So without further ado, I guess I've used up a lot of your time. So I've got 5 minutes, I think, here at the end, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to offer. I hope that didn't seem like you were drinking through a hose as I was trying to get a lot of stuff out to you.
Thank you, Jim. Does anyone have any questions for him?
Well, my name is Wingraves Moody. I live in Lee. I'm very concerned about reproductive health care and the lack of funding, and the executive council actually axing our funding, to be quite blunt about it. I see a breath of fresh air in you, in that I see adversity that you've overcome in Ireland, and all the other obstacles that you seem to have overcome, that you talk about. My question is, how do you persuade the taking of federal funds so that we can fund our Planned Parenthood and our Love Ring and the other healthcare facilities that we have in the state? How can you bridge that gap for us?
I don't quite follow. I mean, at the executive council, the issue has been that they have not allowed that funding.
Correct.
They have defunded. So
Right.
it's a very uncomplicated thing. You simply vote to fund those programs.
Correct.
So I thought maybe you were asking how might I convince those who vote against that to come on board. I don't know if that was your question.
Absolutely.
If that's your question, then I would demand of them to be accountable for their vote. I'd ask them to explain, for instance, when it came to the sex education issue for students and the reduction of teenage pregnancy, I'd say to them, there's a 25-year history of this program having been successful. It has been voted on by Republicans and Democrats for a couple of decades on this board. What has changed, Mr. Jones, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Smith? What is it you hope to achieve by, what is your end? If it's not just blind ideology, because it's certainly not going to help the taxpayers of the state of New Hampshire. It's certainly not going to help people in our cities and in our towns who are impoverished, who don't have access to contraception, who don't have access to cervical cancer screening, and they don't have, it doesn't do any of those things. So I would loudly and not let the vote go by. I'm not allowing the vote to go forward till you explain to me the reason why you are voting the way you are. Now, I'm not all vinegar and ire, there are carrots and sticks. I can be a very reasonable person, but I just think the horrible things that are being done on the social side in the state of New Hampshire. We have free and reduced lunch in the state of in Manchester. We have some schools with 90% poverty. Some have 50%. Manchester has lots of nice areas that are not full of impoverished people, but we have impoverished people there. 39 states in the United States allow Medicare to be used, and that's what decides who gets free and reduced lunch. The state of New Hampshire, bloody mindedly, does not, and therefore the best calculation is there are 8,000 to 100,000 children in the state of New Hampshire not getting free and reduced lunch because the Republicans in the House and the Republicans in Concord, including the Executive Council, will not allow us to use what 39 other states do. So it's too often, you see these things go by like quietly in the night, and you read on page 12 of the Concord Monitor or page 6 of the Union Leader that the Executive Council, decimated some program or closed it down yesterday. I'd want to make that front page news. If Chris Sununu wants to get re-elected, he'll have to get re-elected with the mess around his ankles of what he actually has done. So I want him like the kid in the room with the broken toys when mom comes home and he can't hide and pretend the room's okay. He said people doing bad things around him, he's allowed it to happen. He's the one who put Frank Edelbrut in office. He's the one who has appointed every judge in the state of New Hampshire. He is the one who has signed off on these legislations, and he's Mr. Teflon walking around the state. So they have no idea the wind that they're going to inherit when I arrive in Concord and say, we're going to get the things done what we've done elsewhere. And so that's the best answer I could give you.
That's what I was looking for. I appreciate that.
Okay, so I will do one last question, just because it's 7:30 and Michael has joined us. But how can the Lee Dems help you?
I think getting the word out is the biggest thing, right? Obviously, any candidate running for office right now, I'm in the business of putting together a lot of money in order to run this campaign. I'm fundraising heavily, and sadly, that's a bit of an anathema to me. I've run 3 times in the city of Manchester and topped the poll without having to raise large amounts of funding, but it turns out that's what you have to do to win. But I think getting the word out is the big thing. The Executive Council is this strange animal that a lot of people don't, with great respect to the populace, a lot of people don't fully understand. They understand governor, they understand senator, they understand the congressional seats. They're not always tuned in to the Executive Council and how important a seat the Executive Council is. So I think that the thing that I would ask of the people in Lee, especially the Democratic leadership there, is to help me to get the word out that a critical way to put brakes on the worst inclinations of our Republican counterparts in the state of New Hampshire is to elect people onto the Executive Council. And certainly District 4 is a very doable district. So that's what I would ask you to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for joining us. I really do appreciate it. I'll just say, since you're both on right now, it's nice to have such strong candidates and just Democratic period. I know this is a seat that we've been struggling with for a while, and I'm just very happy to have you both here. So thank you so much.
Okay, and again, I'd just like to visit whether you would, I don't mind. I'm willing to do whatever, but if I've had a half an hour of your time, and if Michael would like to have that without me, Michael and I, we met on Sunday at the parade together. We met the night before at an event in Manchester, so we see each other often. So I'd be happy to bow out and leave the floor to Michael. I trust your good judgment.
Well, thank you. I mean, again, this is going to get posted, so everyone's going to see it. So no matter what, if you stay on, you can still watch this later. So I'd say the same thing with Michael, even though, he signed on probably 10 minutes ago. You can still watch this too. So everything's open to everybody.
Perfect. It's all good. In the end, we want to win, and Michael and I are agreed on this. We want to win that seat in November. That's the critical piece. So I will buy out and I let you add it. I'd be happy to review it afterwards or whatever.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Jim. We all really appreciate you being here.
Jim and I are buddies, so if he wants to stay, we could Q&A at the end.
I'll be fine. I'll see you guys. I hope we'll do this again soon, and I'll be spending time in Lee, and not just at the bookstore this time, even though I know it's closed now, but that was my go-to place. So I'll see you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, so with that said, Michael, thank you for joining us. I did make a comment how your daughter was playing soccer today, so sorry if that I shouldn't have shared that. You all got rained out, and we are currently experiencing a thunderstorm as well. So, with that said, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate your patience. The the unintended consequence of the rain out was I actually got to put a real shirt on for you guys. So never a bad thing. But if I look a little disheveled, I'm right in between getting thank you notes out the door and in a bridge soccer practice, and we're gonna go put up a couple signs with some Manchester Dems in a minute. So it's that's what the days look like at this point. Eric, good to see you. Dean, good to see you. Anybody I haven't met, it's a pleasure to meet you, and thanks for having me. I will try to keep this pretty short and sweet, just so that we can have plenty of time for Q&A. I think a lot of you guys have kind of heard my story before, so I don't want to belabor it. I very much came to this backwards. I never had any intentions of being involved in politics. And I absolutely did it backwards. So when our former president got elected, I was out in Peterborough, New Hampshire. And like many people, I knew what that meant, and I got involved. And so, ended up serving on the New Hampshire Democratic Party Platform Committee. My background is in English and history. I actually have a master's in post-colonial and Caribbean literature, which is kind of a strange thing to go to school for. But so I threw my hat in the ring and said, hey, I can put my writing skills to good use before my friends and family kill me for failing to stop talking about politics and this guy named Donald Trump. So next thing you know, I got a call from some guy named Ray Buckley. I had no idea who he was, nor that I was being phone screened, or at the time, to be honest with you, I think on paper they potentially needed a moderate middle-aged white guy, and I made the cut. So I served on the platform committee under Cindy Warmington, and that was my first experience in New Hampshire politics. I knew nothing. I did not know there were town committees. I did not know there were county committees. I did not know we had 400 state reps. I certainly didn't know what an executive council was. But I learned probably faster than I wanted to what was going on. And so ended up quickly becoming a town chair in Peterborough. So I have the utmost of respect, Amanda and David, for what you guys do. I understand what this means and how important it is. In 2018, I ended up lobbying Annie Custer to give us money to open an office because the party had not planned on opening an office in Peterborough. And we actually set the all-time voter turnout record knocking on doors in Peterborough. And it was, I'm very proud of that. Granted, it's Peterborough, similar to Lee, pretty solidly blue territory. But I think we actually beat Obama's 2012 presidential year in a midterm. And so I was proud of that. But long story short, ended up moving to Bedford. I've worked in Bedford for 12 years, managing a small staffing firm. So my actual professional background is contracts and labor and staffing through what has been, probably the worst labor shortage in the last 40 years, if not national history. And, so I've spent a lot of time supporting both private and public sector organizations, fill positions, and quietly have been urging them to pay at or above market because, investing in people, in my opinion, yields by far the best return on investment. And that is a primary function of the executive council, approving these contracts. And we still have a, statewide labor shortage. So anyway, I ended up, I am on the Bedford Town Council. When I ran, I ended up beating two Republicans in red Bedford by both their votes combined. But I never wanted to be on the Bedford Town Council. The only thing I ever wanted to run for was executive council, going back to 2021. So I didn't run in 2022 because at the time, Senator Kevin Kavanaugh was going to run, and I didn't think we should have a primary. And so I didn't do it then. I said, go get him. I said, I'm not going to do that to me or you. I don't want Manchester versus the world. We've had the luxury of these last three executive council races where we have had, and this is no knock to Jim or Manchester candidates at all, but we have had candidates who have won Manchester and lost the race. And so I think we have, again, the luxury of experience here. We saw Gray come within less than a point in 2018. Mark didn't fare as well in 2020. And then Kevin came within 4 points, 4.5, give or take, in in 2022. So, I've had my eye on this for a long time. After knocking on a lot of doors for other people and being encouraged to run, I very naively wandered into an executive council meeting in 2021, and it was the 3rd time that they voted to reject federal funding for Planned Parenthood. And to be perfectly honest with you, I haven't stopped talking about it since. I spoke to Ted Gatsis at that point. That's the first time I ever met him. And to be blunt, I got pissed off. I have an 8-year-old daughter. She is now 10. And that's what started this whole road. So, certainly I've learned, how deep the rabbit hole, goes from there. And, I'll stop for a second because I want to try to, only talk for another 5 or 6 minutes. But I'll kind of go back in time. I've shared some of my background. I've also served on the PFAS state committee for the last 2 years. But, in my experience in both staffing in the private sector and in politics, people don't really care about resumes. I think they care more about results. And, what I learned very quickly is that we have an executive council that is not doing their job. They're not delivering results for the people of New Hampshire. We have a bench of corporocratic partisan judges that has been appointed by the executive council, who on recent occasions have sooner sided with a 300-year-old multinational French corporate chemical polluter called Saint-Gobain over individual property rights and the rights of our children to drink clean water. We have an executive council, with the exception of Cindy Warmington, who has aggressively undermined not only women's healthcare and not only reproductive freedom, but actually everybody's healthcare. Because when you undermine women's reproductive health, you actually drive up the cost of healthcare. You downshift costs to municipalities when emergencies that are acute become even more serious than they already were. I testified on the constitutional amendment to protect reproductive freedom in New Hampshire, because part of my story is that, my daughter was born in an emergency situation. And, at that point, had things gone sideways, at one point I thought I'd be lucky to get one of them, either her or, her mom. And we were lucky. But had that not been the case, she would have had a choice. That doctor would have been in a situation where, had he needed to make a split-second decision, he would have been empowered to do that. So when we put any restrictions on reproductive health care, we undermine neonatal health care for women who want to have, and families who want to have babies on their own terms. We drive up your health care, the cost of your health care and my health care. So there are unintended consequences here that I think cut to the core of this issue. And I think when you had asked that question, and that's probably why that's fresh in my mind a little bit, is that this is something that affects everybody. And it undermines the healthcare system, plain and simple, regardless of people's personal positions on abortion, even for our friends who may not believe that it constitutes equal reproductive health care. And to win in a red area, we have to be willing to have those tough conversations. This is a gerrymandered red district, and we have to win independence. But I'll shift gears here. When I was a kid, and I think this is kind of something that informs my values, I went to a little community school in Sarasota, Florida. I was actually raised Republican, believe it or not. Although it turns out my mom, who was a special ed teacher and businesswoman, had secretly been voting Democrat since Jimmy Carter, I think in the 70s, on reproductive health care issues. So I guess the apple doesn't fall too far. And sorry for those of you who have heard that joke before, but it makes me laugh every time I say it. So I grew up in a small community school. It actually reminds me a lot of the small community school that my daughter goes to now. And I was, I hit it was a Catholic school. I hit the short window where, we were taught liberation theology and social justice, not social control. And I'll never forget, at the end of Mass every Friday, we had Sister Monica was her name, and she would get up on the altar after the predictably Irish priest was done, and she got the last word, which was kind of funny because I don't know that was allowed. And she would call out playground bullying and behavior, and make sure we were acting like decent little human beings. But she would always leave us with a final sort of piece of advice that has stuck with me my entire life. And what she said was that, kids, that's all well and good. But when you die, you'll only be asked two questions. Were you loved, and did you love? And that's all God cares about. And that was not profound for me then, but in the world in which we currently live, I think there's value in remembering that. Back to this executive council, they don't believe in these values. When I walked into that meeting in 2021, the callousness, the disconnect from the people that they are supposed to represent was, I was gobsmacked by that. In addition to the obvious that we've already discussed, they have appointed a board of education that does not believe in public education, let alone separation of church and state. And I know we say it till we're literally blue as Democrats in the face, but we got to fix it. And so, I won't sugarcoat this. We've all heard about the stakes of this election. I believe that we are in the midst of an intergenerational crisis. I've talked to voters across most of the 20 towns in this district because I've been quietly running for 2 years at this point, thinking it would be against the most entrenched, incumbent Republican in the state, Ted Gatsas. And then, apparently I scared him away, so he retired. But now we have a wide open primary, which is totally fine. But it's I talk to people, and a lot of voters in New Hampshire are older. I don't. It's just the reality of the demographics of our state. And I have people ask me, how do we get? We can't win without millennials and Gen Z. How do we get young people to show up and care? And my advice to people is always pretty simple. Listen to us. Start there. Believe the reality of our lives, what it looks like to be a working family in this state, in this country. And so, in my opinion, and obviously I come at this from selfish reasons. If I didn't have a child, let alone a child who was a daughter, I may not care right now, but I do. And I believe that we are at war, and we can choose to win battles, that are political in the ballot box, or 10 or 20 years from now, those battles might look a lot different. And so that's why, however inconvenient this is, I've decided to step up to this moment and run for something that is prohibitively hard to do. So, when I say we're at war, I think we have been for the last couple of years. We're at war for our daughters and our moms and our sisters and, the people we love most. But I believe fundamentally that we are also at war for ourselves. Regardless of how we identify, whom and how we choose to love, I think we have to remember that when our brothers and sisters and neighbors and even our enemies, even our opponents, freedoms are undermined, we become less free too. A wise man once said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's a core value that I've always believed in, and part of the reason I'm running. So, we'll wrap it up here. I'll tell you one quick story, and I know Dean's heard it before, so sorry, Dean. So our family initially came from Eastern Europe once upon a time. It was Czechoslovakia at the time, Slovakia now. And my great-grandmother actually left that country in 1938. She got out before Hitler got in. They actually took me back. My grandmother and great-grandmother took me back when I was 10 years old, the same age my kiddo is now. And it was 1995, and they had not even recovered from communism yet. I vividly remember 10 football fields worth of land that had been appropriated by the authoritarian Soviet government. And anyway, so grandma left in 1938. She did not speak a word of English. She was 8 months pregnant. She left her husband behind. And her first job was as a janitor. She mopped the floors of the Empire State Building. And the reason that I share that story is pretty simple. She took that chance and left everything behind so that her daughter could be born in a free country. And I believe we are in a situation now where we require a new generation of leaders willing to step up and defend our most fundamental freedoms. And guarantee that our children do not grow up in a country where they have fewer rights than their moms and their grandmas did. And that's, for me, as simple as it gets. So, we talk a lot about, freedom and democracy being on the ballot this year. I believe our future is on the ballot. And, I talk to people again across districts. I hear a lot of fear, fear over what another Trump presidency could mean for this country, concern over environmental viability for the future. That's half the reason Gen Z doesn't vote. They don't think they'll be here, let alone have kids. We make it, we disincentivize people going to work. We disincentivize people having kids. And I don't say that to be cynical or dark. I believe fundamentally that there is only one thing in this world that is stronger than fear. And that thing is hope. And so I believe we have to put hope on the ballot. We have to bring hope to the table when we're talking to people, whether they are recent grads worried about affording a home, or seniors worried about the untenable rising tide of property taxes that risks taxing them out of their homes that they've worked their entire lives for. These two, sides have more in common than we think in terms of seniors and young folks in New Hampshire. So, I do believe if we work hard, that we can do this. I think if we're willing to speak to people with whom we may disagree, we can do this. I think as Democrats, we have to be willing to rebuild bridges, even if we weren't the ones who burned them down, if we want to win this year and if we believe in what we're fighting for. And so I'll close with that. I do have hope that we can build a future that is worthy of our children and grandchildren if we learn from the sacrifices of our parents and grandparents. And I think that's a simple message that will resonate, with people in this state, because we have to unite this party. We have to get people to turn up. We have to win independence. And, I would just urge you, when you vote in September now and November, but, don't let fear drive you to the polls. Make sure that hope follows you there. And I think people can feel that. And that's what I plan to do. And I went way too long. So now pepper me with as many questions as you can. But political viability, how we win in this gerrymandered 20-town district, fundraising, differences between me and my opponent, or even the Republicans. Take your pick.
Thank you.
I think.
Go ahead, Dean.
I'm looking at the November 8th, 2022 Lee ballot. Hassan got 1580. Pappas 1619, Kawaka 1610, and Kavanaugh 1521. So, somewhere like 80 Democrats didn't bother to check his box there. Any idea why that might be and what we can do to stop that?
Yeah, that's a good question. The biggest challenge with the executive council is the undervote. That's historically been the case. One thing that was shocking to me when I looked at this was, I think it was the difference between 22 and it may not have been 20, and maybe either 18 and 20 or 20 and 22. Our buddy Lou D'Alessandro retired today, and one of my first conversations was over his kitchen table. I don't know that he'll endorse in this race for many reasons, both complicated and not. But, we went right through his red book and looked at every number from Kevin's race. I know directly what went right and wrong in each of these last three races. And if we can combine those things, we got a shot. I think the difference was 14,000 votes, right? Between 18 and 20, 22 and 20. There was only a 14,000 vote difference between a midterm and a presidential year for executive council. That's crazy. That number should be exponentially higher in terms of voter turnout. So the fact that the difference in voter turnout for executive council between a midterm and presidential year means that so few people are voting for it, even in a presidential year. So, that's the challenge. I think we have to be different. We have to run a different kind of campaign. I'm a door knocker. Not that I don't like making fundraising calls, which is unfortunately part of the ball game, but I'm living this race and have been living this race for a year with every single human being I talk to, regardless of whether they are a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. And so, short answer, Dean, the way you make up 80 votes is one at a time and knocking on doors in Lee, which I already did a little bit. And I was spoiled because you're one of only like 3 real blue towns in the district. Does that answer that question?
Well, yeah, I think the answer was just Kevin didn't really show up here.
I was trying to be nice.
Don't be nice. Win.
Don't be nice, win. Fair enough. Yeah.
Go ahead, Nina.
I don't really have a question, but I
Okay.
am absolutely very impressed by the fact that you are talking about working with all parties. That's all I have to say, is you've impressed me with that approach, because it's the only way you're going to be successful in the state of New Hampshire.
I appreciate that.
That's
Nate.
it.
Well, we don't have a choice, And when I talked about being willing to rebuild bridges we didn't burn down, listen, I'm a Democrat. I've never voted for a Republican, in my entire life. It's painful, those times when you have to bite your tongue, and redirect or pick a different issue, and there's that line between, like, we're never going to sell out when it comes to our values, but we have to win these damn elections. We have to, because when we're in the seat, that's when it matters, and we've seen the damage that, Sununu has done. I've dealt with this, my limited 12 years in New Hampshire, but, half that time has been, as an activist or a town chair, right, where I'm knocking on doors for other people. And the cognitive dissonance, you can almost time it. Like, you go down, ballot up, you're talking about public ed, you're talking about reproductive rights, you're talking about environmental rights, really apolitical, bipartisan issues for the most part. And then you get to the top with Chris. And you're talking to like a public school teacher, and you see their eyes glaze over and they kind of go starry-eyed, and well, what about, Sununu? You go, well, but he's such a nice guy. And that's how we have Democrats who have voted for Chris Sununu. I never have, but so, we have to be able to play this game a little bit too, as long as, again, we're not undermining, the core values that are driving us to run and win. We have to be unashamed at times, but I think the strategy that I've learned, at least in Bedford, which is, we didn't elect a Democrat in Bedford until 2018. The last one was 1934, and it was Sue Mullen. And, she had a baked-in advantage because she'd been a guidance counselor for 20-some years, right? But she was one of the first openly lesbian women elected, let alone as a Democrat in Bedford. And it's because she was bipartisan. She put people first, So anyway, sorry not to piggyback, but that's the only way. It's the only way.
I'm sure Lou D'Alessandro would tell you the same thing. And once you get there, to create common ground with the people who sit next to you, instead of going on the attack and digging your heels in, the way to go about it is create commonality on some issues so you have credibility on the others. I'm speaking from 21 years in the House.
Yeah, I think those are wise words. And I think another dynamic here, and I'll say this kind of, gently, given that we are in a primary and, this was a forum for 2 candidates, but, my experience, again, limited sample, right, New Hampshire, and this is really good news for us on the Republican side, is digging in running hyper partisan races is great in primaries, and you can win the primary, but then you lose the general. And that's what we're going to see Ryan Terrell and Bob Burns do. God help them. They're going to try to out-Trump each other. And one of those two, I believe, will win the general, or will win the primary, excuse me. I am excited to run against Bob Burns. I will tell you that. I will run circles around that man. Ryan Terrell will be more difficult, but I can beat him too because I've already practiced making him lose his temper in the past when I testified on PragerU last summer. But this is the deal for us too, is we can run a really partisan campaign and beat the drum, but I feel like they often fall flat in the general. And so I can only be, somebody told me recently, I think it was actually Mike Liberty running in too, because we have very different personalities. And I was like, I appreciate kind of your quiet, you have kind of that quiet, calm deal. And no knock to Karen, this was just he and I talking. And he looked at me and he said, the only person we can be is ourselves. I said, that's right. So, I don't know any other way to do it because I grew up in rural Southwest Florida. So, I have to talk to Trump people, whether I like it or not.
Awesome. Any other questions for Michael?
Come on, Eric. I need at least one. Give me a heavy hitter here. I see you thinking back there.
I'm looking at this ballot. It's Tom Sherman 1307, Chris Sununu 1044 compared to 1619 Pappas 761 on the other side.
Yeah. If only we could multiply your population,
Right.
double or triple it, the race would be over.
I don't think Ayot's going to have the appeal of Sununu.
I don't think she will either. But I am concerned. I'm tempted to flip it around because every town committee I've spoken to, I ask, I'm doing a straw hat poll on the gubernatorial race. If anybody wants to share their thoughts there, I'm collecting data for myself at this point.
Okay, so I've got a question for you. I don't know how good it is, but so I know because you helped me in my campaign that when I gave you the turf to walk, you told me afterwards that you went a bit off script and you were knocking on all the doors in the neighborhood, not just the reliable Democratic votes in there. And I'm wondering, that's my dog barking. I'm wondering as the actual voting day approaches, kind of would you change your strategy in that sort of thing, right? Because at some point the math takes over, right?
Yep, absolutely. So that's actually a great question. And there's an easy answer and not an easy answer. The easy answer from my perspective, from a strategy standpoint, where I'm targeting every independent in the district who has ever voted for a Democrat before and trying to talk to them or make sure they see something digital or that they have, a mail piece in their mailbox, because there's only one of me. This is why many people say you don't even knock doors in the executive council district. You just raise money to mail and spend on digital. I think we have to do both because that's what Gray did. And Gray, again, in a blue wave year, granted, but he came within less than a point, but he did no field. Kevin did a little bit coordinate, they did coordinated campaign field. And I will openly admit, Eric, I had a motive knocking on doors for you. Yes, it was to help you, but it was also to talk to voters, knowing how difficult it would be to beat Ted, that you have to be on doors for 10 months, which is what these state Senate candidates essentially have to do. They have to knock 2,000 doors. And so to bring it back to your point though, you can't waste time, right? So the second I'm engaged with typically a Trump voter, I get out politely, unless there's some weird opportunity. But what you do is we have to change the universe a little bit. So when you're in a gerrymandered red district, I think there is value in talking to people who are not just the reliable Dems. It's unfortunate that this is recorded because now I'm going to get yelled at by my campaign manager for saying that. But it's within reason too, right? I did that with the turf I had for you because it was a mobile home park, right? So it was very easy. When you saw someone was home, it was another 10 seconds to see where they landed, right? Manchester is really easy. You're talking to dog walkers often, when you're driving down the street and jumping between houses. My experience so far has been, and it's either lucky or whatever, but when I was in Manchester last week, every blind door that I knocked on, which was only 5 maybe of the 20 or 30 little turf I did, they were all undeclareds. They were all undeclareds because it's New Hampshire. there are more undeclareds in the Republican towns in this district than there are Republicans. Bedford just voted for Nikki Haley, and it wasn't because they love Nikki Haley. It was a referendum against Trump. Bedford was the only town, which is crazy, that was red, that didn't overwhelmingly go for Trump. So the simple part of it is this, though, Eric, is we have to, because, I bought the voter file from the party. So when I meet an undeclared who is friendly, I am adding them to the voter file. I'm actually adding them to our universe. So now they will get the digital and the mail reminders to show up, because the risk, right, I think where you're going with this, which is totally a risk, is that they have a great conversation with you one time and they like you for whatever rational or irrational reason, and then they forget all about you and they don't show up. So it's not easy to do, but again, we're not running in District 2, right, where it's a gerrymandered blue district. Like, we have to fight. We have to go on offense. We have to compete and change that math, in addition to relying on where it works. Kevin, ironically, the numbers on Kevin were that, super nice guy, like, good for that spot, and, I was supportive of his campaign. I was surprised. He did exceptionally well in Hooksett and Bedford and Goffstown. Where he left votes on the table? And maybe this was a precursor for the recent mayor's race. He left votes on the table in Manchester. Manchester is different right now than it used to be. They just elected a Republican mayor because he was young, he was moderate, and he talked to everybody. And if that's not a bellwether for what people are looking for, both in the state and the country right now, I don't know what else to say, and that's not meant to be a pitch for me. It's the political reality right now, I think. I overtalked that answer. I'm sorry, Eric.
No, you didn't. I think that was an important answer, because I'm not I'm not at all mad that you did what you did that day, because I believe in the idea that you need to trust people to know when it's time to break the rules.
Mm.
And I'm glad that you did it. And I think I suspect it worked that day. And if you're doing it in the proper amount over time, I think it's going to work very well for you when it counts.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, people who are 3-4 starred Democratic voter scores, they're going to vote, and obviously, again, primary, different story. But, if we're talking about the general right now, they're going to vote for the Democrat on the ballot. As much as I'd love to spend an hour talking to them because we will agree on everything, that's not how we win,
If we got another minute, I got time to get you canceled. There's 3 bills going to Sununu, I think, on the trans issues. Do you want to? I mean, I think centrists win in New Hampshire, but this is a touchy issue. So, do you want to render an opinion on those 3 bills?
Sure. Yeah, I'll render maybe 3 quick opinions. Number one, I think there's value in knowing when to say, my opinion is not the most important opinion on an issue, because it's not. Number two, trans rights are civil rights. Human rights are civil rights. For me, it is as simple as it gets. It's actually a libertarian argument. One thing I'm not going to do is waste time fighting with Republicans who have a constant stream of Fox News in their ear. And in their world, we have an open border where our blood is being, quote unquote, polluted, which is nonsense. Trans kids are taking over our classrooms, which is nonsense. I see go into the classroom. Why don't you try to go visit the school? Do you have kids in the school? But unfortunately, you're not going to win those polarized arguments with people who think these are the pressing crises of our time. They're not. We have to talk to people who I think are feeling the real challenges right now, and also the opportunities that come with those challenges, which are on, energy and, economic costs and the quality of their kids' public education and how much things cost and economic issues, and that's tricky to do, Dean. I'm not going to pretend like I am an expert it deflecting, on that issue. I think part of it is to not deflect and to say where we stand and stand up to them. But I'm uninterested in debating issues that have been manufactured, frankly, by Republicans. They create problems. They're creating problems to win elections and to get, to run up the score in the House and the Senate. And, the sad reality is it has both short-term and long-term potential to actually hurt real people. So I try to bring it back to just the humanity, the shared humanity that we all have. And maybe we should start there.
To push back, I think there's a fair number of people in the center who don't want biological males on on women's sports team, who thought the purpose of Title IX was to sort of give the women a place to do their thing there.
Yep.
And they don't want biological males being grouped with girls on field trips and things like that. And, part of that is hysteria, but part of that is reality in actual cases of parents being asked to lie. And, just every stereotypical type of the liberal secret plan, actually being reality.
I think you're not wrong. I guess this is where, I think maybe the way I started to answer this is the best I can do, and maybe I'm not the best on this issue, but I'm willing to listen to people, and listen to what those real experiences were, because in my very limited sample, again, I personally as a parent haven't, run into this being problematic. I have talked to some parents who have given me, part of this hysteria, part of this valid concern. I think we got to hear them out. But I mean, in my limited, again, secondhand experience from educators, from coaches, from people who deal with the reality of these situations, I think people tend to work through them with a level of sensitivity. If I wake up one day and my daughter, who's sitting behind me, so I guess she's going to hear this conversation, but is competing against somebody who is biologically different than their gender identity, or originally was biologically at birth different, and she's upset about that or feels like it's not fair, then as a dad, I'm going to listen to that, and work through it. But I don't know that it's my job to go legislate an issue that I haven't had any direct experience with. And I tend to revert to local control. Why are we dealing with this at the state level and painting with a broad brush and using the large stamp of government to determine issues that are complicated and nuanced and local and specific to individual schools and teams and communities? Those should be locally driven, policies and things that we're working through, not the big stamp of government. That is the best I can do on that.
I think you got through it without being canceled. So great.
It's a fine line.
Awesome. Well, let's wrap it up with just saying, how can the Lead Dems help you?
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, you already have. And, I plan on spending time in Lee. Again, I wish you were 3 times the size, then I could justify spending more time. But, I am in a primary. I will be direct. My challenge, I never in a million years would have thought I was going against, going from running as a prohibitive underdog against Ted Gatsis to, an open primary, where essentially now I believe that when I win the primary, I will win the race. So the dynamics could not have shifted any more drastically. I hope I've earned your support, or at least the opportunity to earn it in the future. For me, I don't need to win Manchester to win the primary. I have a very specific number and a vote count that I have to achieve. I'm still planning to win, because if I win Manchester in this primary, then I have won the general election. So that's the focus right now. But I spent a lot of time, the last 6 months in, a lot of the other smaller towns in the district to try and build a foundation and a base, knowing that this would be a very difficult thing to do. And so I guess I would just ask for your support, Amanda.
Well, that's a good way of ending. I thank you all for being here. Michael, when I send, and I'll say this to Jim, even though he's not listening anymore. But if he listens to this video, I'm going to send both of your information out to the lead Dems, so you might hear from people individually. But other than that, we'll stay in touch, and you guys are welcome, obviously, to come to any event that we might have as a lead Dem group.
Awesome.
Any final words from anybody?
Thanks for
I'd
coming
just like
to
to
the
say
Canadian Lee
one-
Artist Fair. Sorry, Wynn.
I just like to say one thing here, that there's an elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is that the general public doesn't really understand what the Executive Council does.
Yep.
I mean, I have many well-educated friends here in the state, and people just don't get the power of the Executive Council.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we can get that information out succinctly so that people can understand this. And I think if we look at what's been defunded and the judges that have been appointed, it's kind of an easy education thing to put out there.
Yeah, 100%. It's easier now than it's been in a while. I agree with that. But, I would actually offer a little bit of a devil's advocate point. In my experience as Democrats, we love to educate people. We love to be right. We love to talk substantive policy because we have brains. And sadly, in the world of casual voters in New Hampshire politics, that's not how it always works. So on one hand, you're right. I'm actually playing with this idea now because I've been in sales for 10 years. And so you do have to create a problem in order to get anybody to care about the solution, even if you're a great solution. So one part of that's absolutely accurate, is highlighting what they haven't done, right, and the deficiency. But I think the other part of it, my strategy is actually to talk local issues and go down ballot up, which is the old town Sharon me, because the second you roll in with your PowerPoint, me in this case, all right, please sit down, dear voter. For the next 15 minutes, I am going to explain to you the merits of the Executive Council, what it does and how it affects you. And they didn't even hear the end of the sentence. So, I think the way that we do this tricky thing, which is get people to pay attention to the Executive Council, is with good candidates. We have to be exciting. We have to offer a message of hope. My gut instinct in this, and obviously I'm very comfortable talking about the EC, but the way to get people to pay attention to the Executive Council as an Executive Council candidate is actually to almost not talk about the Executive Council. Elevate the bigger issues, pretend like you're running for governor, don't get in the weeds, and let them ask you. So, hey, wait, you're really interesting. What are you running for again? Oh, Executive Council. What's the Executive Council? So when a voter asks us the question, that's a powerful thing. Now they're going to remember. And that's a nuanced dynamic, but that's my goal.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm going to go put some signs up before it gets dark in Manchester.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining, and I'll be reaching out to y'all later with Jude's meeting. So thanks all for joining tonight. I appreciate y'all being here.
Amanda, thank you so much for facilitating this. I really appreciate the opportunity.
It's our pleasure. Awesome. Well, y'all have a good night.
So, Amanda, you didn't want us to hold on for some sort of vote?
No,
Bye, guys.
we'll do it next month. It's all good. Bye.
All right.